I knew my brother-in-law was controlling. I suspected he was cruel, but I never imagined he was capable of murder. At 1 a.m. on a Tuesday night, my identical twin sister appeared at my door covered in bruises, her hair tangled, her hands trembling. There were red marks circling her throat, finger marks, still fresh. She could barely breathe when she whispered those 4 words that froze my blood. He tried to kill me. My knees went weak. For years, I'd told her to leave him, but she always said he'd change. Now, staring at her broken face, I realized he never would. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I didn't call the police. I didn't call anyone. I made a decision that night that would change both our lives forever. I became her. I walked into her nightmare, and I made sure her abuser would never hurt anyone again. This is that story. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. If you're the kind of person who can't stand injustice but still hesitates to subscribe, ask yourself why let stories like this slip past you when they could open your eyes to the truth. Let me take you back to that night, January 14th, a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. I was in my pajamas, half listening to the late-night news, the kind of quiet evening where the hum of the refrigerator sounds louder than the TV. I remember thinking about calling Sarah before bed. She hadn't answered my texts all day, but I told myself she was probably asleep. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, desperate, urgent, the kind of knock that makes every hair on your body stand up. I froze. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. Then came another round, harder this time, echoing through the apartment like gunshots. My heart raced. I tiptoed toward the door, my mind spiraling through every possibility and emergency, a stranger or worse. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw through that peephole. It was me. My own face staring back, pale, terrified, eyes swollen from crying. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. But it wasn't me, it was Sarah, my identical twin, my other half. Only, she looked like she'd been dragged through hell. When I opened the door, she stumbled forward into my arms, barely standing. Her left eye was swollen shut, dark, purple, and red. Her lips split open, dried blood crusted on her chin. But what made my stomach drop weren't the cuts or the bruises, it was her neck. A ring of dark fingerprints wrapped around her throat like a twisted necklace. It looked like someone had tried to squeeze the life out of her. My throat tightened. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just another fight. This wasn't just a bad night. Someone had tried to kill my sister. But what she told me next was even worse. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice so soft it barely sounded human. It cracked halfway through my name. Then her knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the ground. Her whole body was trembling, every breath a struggle. I helped her inside, locked the door, and guided her to the couch. She clung to me like a child, gasping in short, uneven breaths, as if speaking might break her completely. I wanted to call an ambulance. I wanted to call the police. But the way she looked at me, wild, terrified, desperate, made me stop. "Sarah, who did this to you?" I asked, though my voice was shaking so badly I could barely recognize it. She didn't answer right away, just covered her face and started to cry. Those weren't ordinary tears, they were the kind that come from years of silent pain finally breaking free. Between sobs, she tried to speak, but her words came out like shattered glass, and I already knew who she meant before she said it. Michael, her husband, the man everyone adored, the man who sent flowers to her office, who volunteered at church, who smiled for every photo. He was the perfect husband in public, but I'd always sensed something off behind that polished smile. Sarah had brushed off my concerns for years, saying he was just protective, that he only got angry when she made mistakes. But as I looked at her broken face, I realized how deep the lie had gone. He hadn't just hurt her emotionally, he had tried to take her life. She told me he'd waited until the kids were asleep, that he'd cornered her during an argument, gripping her neck until she couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, that she only escaped when he thought she was dead and walked away. She said she ran barefoot for miles until she reached my door. I sat there, holding her as she shook, realizing that if she hadn't made it to me, I'd be identifying her body instead of bandaging her wounds. I thought I knew what rage was before that night. I didn't. Not until I saw what he'd done to her, because in that moment, every part of me changed. I wasn't just a sister anymore. I became her last line of defense. But I didn't know the full truth yet. I didn't know that this wasn't the first time he'd gone that far, or that she wasn't the only one in danger. What she told me next made me realize this wasn't just abuse. This was attempted murder. Let me tell you about Sarah and me. We weren't just sisters, we were mirror images of each other. Identical twins, born 7 minutes apart, though I was the first to take a breath. And trust me, I never let her forget that. Growing up, people couldn't tell us apart. Even our own mother used to mix us up, calling out one name and then quickly correcting herself with the other. But the truth is, we were never really the same. I was the bold one, the one who'd jump in front of bullies, the one who'd rather take a punch than see someone else cry. Sarah was gentle, thoughtful, the kind of person who believed every soul had good in them if you just waited long enough to see it. She'd sit for hours nursing an injured bird back to health, while I stood nearby rolling my eyes but secretly admiring her heart. When Mom died suddenly when we were 16, the world became smaller, colder. It was just the two of us trying to navigate life with a father who barely held himself together. We learned early to depend on each other for everything. She was the reason I became a physical therapist to fix what's broken. She became a social worker to save what's hurting. We talked every single day, no matter what. Even when we lived in different cities, that bond never wavered. We were inseparable, until Michael. I should have seen the warning signs earlier, but he was good, really good at hiding who he really was. Sarah met Michael at a charity gala 5 years ago. It was one of those events where people dressed in tuxedos, sipping champagne while pretending to care about causes they'd never think about again. She said he noticed her before she even walked through the door. He was 36, charming, a successful corporate lawyer with a perfectly pressed suit and that smooth confidence that made people lean in when he talked. He donated a large sum to the nonprofit where Sarah worked, then made sure to find her afterward to thank her personally. That was his style, big gestures, big impressions. Within a week, he was sending her flowers every other day, the kind of attention Sarah wasn't used to. Dinners at 5-star restaurants, weekend trips to wine country. Long messages about how she was different from anyone he'd ever met. I met him for the first time during their 3rd date. Sarah insisted I host dinner so we could all get to know each other. And the moment he stepped through my door, I felt something tighten in my chest. He smiled too perfectly, spoke too smoothly, complimented my cooking before he'd even tasted it. He said all the right things, but it was the way he looked at Sarah that unsettled me. It wasn't love, it was possession. Like she wasn't beside him, but under him. I remember that look because I'd seen it once before in a stray dog guarding a stolen bone. I pulled Sarah aside that night, tried to warn her. I told her I didn't trust him, that something about him didn't sit right. She got defensive, said I was being overprotective, that I couldn't stand to see her happy. She even accused me of being jealous. That was our first real fight in over 20 years. She left angry, and for the first time in our lives, we didn't talk for an entire week. After that, she started to drift away. I kept telling myself it was normal, new love, new priorities. But deep down, I knew something was changing. Something I couldn't stop. Anyone who's ever tried to warn someone they love knows that moment, that helpless feeling when your words fall on deaf ears and you start to wonder if you should have said more or stayed silent. What would you have done? They got married 10 months later. It was a quick wedding, small but beautiful. Michael said, "When you know, you know." He made everything sound so romantic, so inevitable. I stood beside Sarah as her maid of honor, smiling for pictures, hiding the unease twisting inside me. Everyone saw a fairy tale chandeliers, laughter, champagne. But I saw something else. I saw the way his hand rested on her lower back, a little too firmly. The way her laugh seemed careful, rehearsed. The way she looked at him before answering questions, as if silently asking for permission. Within a year of their marriage, Sarah had quit her job at the nonprofit, the job she loved. She said Michael wanted her to rest, to focus on building their home. They moved into his house, an hour away from the city, surrounded by tall fences and silence. She stopped coming to our weekly sister lunches, always with an excuse. She missed birthdays, holidays, even our old inside jokes. One by one, she cut off her friends. She said she was busy, tired, overwhelmed. But I knew better. We were twins. I could always feel her energy. And suddenly, I couldn't feel her anymore. It was like she'd gone quiet inside. Still, I tried to believe it was just marriage, new routines, new roles. But then the signs started to show. She began wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer. She started canceling our calls at the last minute. When we did talk, she sounded distant, like someone else was listening. Her once bright voice had dulled into something mechanical. And her eyes, those eyes that used to light up a room, looked hollow, afraid to meet mine. I kept trying to rationalize it, telling myself I was overthinking things. Until the day I showed up unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon. I drove the hour to her house, determined to surprise her, maybe spend the day together like old times. Michael answered the door. His expression didn't change when he saw me. He leaned against the frame, blocking my view inside. He said Sarah was sleeping, that she'd been unwell. I tried to step forward, but he didn't move, just smiled, that tight fake smile, and said maybe I should call before visiting next time. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. I left, but my gut told me something was very wrong. 3 months later, I saw Sarah at the grocery store. She looked thinner, frail, her shoulders hunched. I hugged her, and she flinched. I pulled back, alarmed. But she smiled weakly and said she'd pulled a muscle at the gym. But Sarah never went to the gym. That's when I realized how deep his control had gone. She wasn't just living with him, she was surviving him. I tried everything to reach her. Calls, messages, letters. But he'd built a cage around my sister, and every time I tried to break through, the walls grew higher. Until that night. The night she showed up at my door at 1 a.m., covered in bruises, whispering that he'd tried to kill her. And for the first time, I understood, if I didn't act now, I'd lose her forever. It took almost 2 hours for Sarah to tell me everything. The words came out in fragments, like pieces of shattered glass she was afraid to touch. She'd start to speak, then stop, staring off at the wall as if the memories were playing out right there in front of her. I just sat beside her, holding her hand, letting her take her time. Sometimes she'd go silent for minutes, her breathing uneven, tears falling without sound. It started small. She said so small, she didn't even realize what was happening. At first, it was just comments, little criticisms about her cooking, her clothes, the way she laughed too loudly at someone's joke. Then, slowly, those words turned into rules, not suggestions, rules. Written, spoken, and enforced with fear. She recited them from memory that night, like a prisoner listing her chains. Michael's rules for Sarah. Coffee ready at exactly 6:15 every morning, not 6:14, not 6:16. Dinner on the table at 6:30. No excuses. The phone must always be accessible, no passwords, no privacy. Every night, he'd scroll through her messages while she sat silently beside him, pretending not to exist. She needed permission before spending even a single dollar. Friends had to be approved. Family calls had to be announced in advance. If she wanted to visit me, she had to ask him first, and most times, he said no. She was to account for every minute she spent outside the house, even trips to the store. And if she broke a rule, there were consequences. At first, those consequences were words, cruel, demeaning, meant to make her question her worth. But soon, they became physical. The yelling turned into grabbing, the grabbing turned into shoving, and before long, the shoving turned into slaps, then punches, always where no one could see. Always followed by apologies that weren't really apologies. He'd buy her jewelry, flowers, sometimes even a spa day, telling her she made him do it, that if she just followed the rules, things would be fine. He wanted her isolated, dependent, small, and over the years, that's exactly what he made her. He was strategic about it. To the world, Michael was charming, successful, generous. But behind closed doors, he was rewriting Sarah's life, turning her into the villain in her own story. He'd tell their friends she was unstable, that she was forgetful, emotional, even paranoid. When she finally tried to confide in people, no one took her seriously. He'd already poisoned the well. He even told me once, jokingly, that Sarah had been a bit fragile lately, that he worried about her mental health. I'd laughed it off at the time. Now, sitting across from her, hearing the tremor in her voice, I felt sick. He'd been building that lie for years, making sure that if she ever cried for help, her voice would sound like madness. But that night, the night she came to me, Michael had gone further than ever before. Sarah said it started like any other evening. She'd made pot roast for dinner, Michael's favorite. Everything was perfect. The table set, candles lit, her dress ironed just the way he liked it. She had even timed the meal so it would be hot and ready at exactly 6:30. She followed every rule. But when Michael walked through the door, she knew something was wrong. His face was tight, his movements sharp. She asked if everything was okay. He ignored her, sat down, took one bite, then spit it out, said it was overcooked. She apologized immediately, told him she'd make something else. He stood up slowly, pushed his chair back, and without a word, threw the entire plate against the wall. It shattered, pieces flying across the floor. Sarah said she didn't even move. She'd learned that reacting only made it worse. Then, without warning, he grabbed her. His fingers dug into her arms, shaking her so hard her teeth rattled. He called her worthless, pathetic, ungrateful. Said she couldn't do anything right, couldn't even cook a meal properly. Then his hands went to her throat. Sarah told me that in that moment, she didn't even scream. She just froze, too terrified to move. She felt his thumbs press into her windpipe, the pressure tightening until her vision blurred. She could feel her legs weakening, her body giving up. She said she thought about me, about our childhood, about how we used to share a room and whisper to each other in the dark. She thought, this is it. This is how I die. And then, just as she felt herself slipping away, his phone rang. He let go. Just like that, turned around, picked up his phone, and answered it as if nothing had happened. Sarah collapsed to the floor, gasping, clutching her neck. She heard him in the next room, laughing, his voice calm, polite, completely detached. When the call ended, she didn't wait. She ran, grabbed her purse, her keys, her phone. She didn't even put on shoes. She just ran. Out the door, into the car, engine shaking beneath her trembling hands. She drove for an hour straight, tears blurring her vision, terrified he'd follow her. But somehow, she made it to me. To safety. To the one place she still believed was hers. My sister sat on my couch that night, shaking, covered in bruises, still gasping like she hadn't yet learned to breathe again. And as I looked at her, I realized something deep inside me had changed. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to wait for the justice system to decide what she deserved. That night, as Sarah fell asleep, wrapped in my blanket, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I was going to make Michael pay, but not the conventional way. I needed a plan that he would never see coming. If you're still watching, leave a comment below. Have you ever felt helpless watching someone you love suffer? Your story matters, and if you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself what's stopping you from joining a community that refuses to look away. Sarah finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. She was curled up on my couch under every blanket I owned, her face still stained with tears. Even in sleep, she trembled her hands, clutching the edge of the blanket like she was afraid it would be taken away. I sat in the kitchen, lights off, staring into the dark. The only glow came from the microwave clock, those red digits cutting through the silence. Each second ticked like a hammer inside my head. I wanted to call the police. That was the first thought that made sense. But what would it do? What proof did we have besides bruises that Michael would dismiss as accidents? His word carried more weight than ours. He was a respected lawyer, a man with power and influence. Sarah was just a woman he'd spent years convincing the world was unstable. No one would believe her. He'd made sure of that. I imagined the police report, how clinical it would sound, how they'd promise to look into it, how he'd charm them, manipulate them, turn their sympathy against her. And then, when the officers left, he'd close that front door and make her pay for every word she dared to say. I could almost hear his voice, calm, deliberate, cruel. Who do you think they'll believe, me or the broken little mess you've become? I pressed my palms against my temples. My heart felt heavy, my thoughts scattered. And then, out of nowhere, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. For a second, I thought I saw Sarah staring back at me. The same eyes, the same face, the same woman, but two completely different lives. That's when it hit me. We were identical twins. The same height, the same voice, when we softened our tone. People had mixed us up our whole lives. I'd always brushed it off, but now it didn't feel funny anymore. It felt like a door opening. What if we switched places? What if I went back there, into that house, as Sarah? I could see him, observe him, record him, find proof that even his expensive lawyers couldn't twist or erase. I wasn't helpless. I was a physical therapist. I understood anatomy, leverage, pain. I'd trained in martial arts for nearly a decade. I knew how to defend myself. If Michael tried to hurt me, he'd realize too late that I wasn't his victim. I could handle him. The thought sent a jolt through me, part fear, part resolve. This was insane, reckless, dangerous. But it was also the only plan that made sense. I could save her. I could end this. But first, I had to convince her. And I knew that would be the hardest part. When Sarah woke up late the next morning, the apartment was filled with the smell of coffee. She looked disoriented, half in the present, half still lost in whatever darkness she'd escaped from. I sat at the table, staring into my mug. My heart was pounding, but my mind was made up. "Sarah," I said softly, "I have a plan." When I told her what it was, her reaction was exactly what I expected. She stared at me in disbelief, her face pale. "Absolutely not," she whispered. "Rachel, no, you don't understand what he's like." But I did. I understood that if she went back, she'd die. "Then help me understand," I said. "Teach me what he expects, how he thinks, what he notices. You can't go back, Sarah, and if you disappear, he'll come after you. But if I go back as you, I can get proof, evidence that puts him away for good." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "If he figures it out, he could kill you," she said. "Then he won't figure it out," I told her. "I won't let him." She fell silent. Minutes passed in heavy quiet. Then, in a voice so small it barely existed, she asked, "Where would I go?" I told her about Mom's old friend Linda, the one who lived 3 hours away. Michael didn't know her. Sarah could stay there, rest, heal. It would be temporary. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in years: hope. Fragile, trembling hope. "How long?" she asked. 1 week, I said. "Just give me 1 week." "And if something goes wrong?" she asked. "It won't," I said, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. That was the moment she surrendered, not out of trust, but out of exhaustion. She had no fight left, and I had all of it. The next 3 days blurred into one long stretch of training, planning, and transformation. 72 hours. That was all we had for me to become her. Sarah taught me how to live by Michael's rules. How to brew his coffee, 2 sugars, cream warmed exactly 20 seconds in the microwave. How to plate dinner so the protein sat at 6 o'clock and the vegetables at 2. Where to place her purse, where to sit, how to walk silently when he was angry. How to lower her voice until she was almost invisible. I studied her every move. The tilt of her head when she apologized, the way she smiled without showing her teeth, the way she flinched just slightly at sudden sounds. By the second day, I could copy her completely. By the third, I wasn't sure where she ended, and I began. Sarah cut my hair to match hers. The strands fell around our feet like pieces of something sacred being shed. We went through her closet, simple blouses, plain skirts, colors that wouldn't draw attention. I put on one of her cardigans and stared at myself in the mirror. The reflection looking back wasn't Rachel anymore. It was Sarah, the quieter, smaller version of me. Then she gave me her wedding ring. It was light but felt unbearably heavy when I slid it onto my finger. This was supposed to mean love, I thought. Now it's just a symbol of control. That night, she pulled out a small metal box from her bag. Inside was a stack of crumpled bills. $2,800, she said. My escape money. I've been saving for a year. $20 here, $50 there. My throat tightened. She'd been planning to leave all along. She just hadn't found the courage until now. We stayed up late, rehearsing, memorizing every detail. The sound of his footsteps, the creak of the floorboard outside his office, the cameras where they were, where they weren't. Every secret corner of that house became a map in my mind. And then, the morning came. I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning one of her blouses, fixing my hair just like she did. When I looked at my reflection, for the first time, I didn't recognize myself. I saw her scared, fragile, and small. Perfectly believable. I whispered to my reflection, "Let's finish this." Because from that moment on, Rachel ceased to exist. Only Sarah remained. And the woman Michael thought he owned was walking back into his world. The morning I walked into Michael's house as Sarah, I thought I was in control. I had no idea just how dangerous he really was. If you're still watching, tell me, would you risk everything to protect your sister? I drove Sarah's car to the house on a Thursday afternoon. The air was heavy that day, the kind that makes your hands shake on the steering wheel even when you're not cold. Michael wouldn't be home until 6. I had checked his calendar, his habits, his every routine. He was a man of patterns, and that was what made him predictable and dangerous. When I pulled into the driveway, I almost laughed. The house stood tall and proud, a perfect brick colonial with white shutters and a neatly trimmed lawn. It looked like something out of a home magazine, the kind of place where a perfect couple would raise perfect children and have perfect dinners. But as I sat there, staring at it, I realized perfection has a way of hiding rot beneath the surface. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was also a cage. Every window gleamed, the flower boxes spilling over with bright red geraniums. Even the front door seemed to smile, polished, welcoming. But I could feel it, that quiet hum of tension beneath the surface, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. When I stepped inside, the air felt wrong. Too clean, too quiet. Like someone had vacuumed not just the floors but the life out of it. Everything was perfect. White furniture arranged with surgical precision. No dust, no clutter, not even a stray hair on the carpet. It was the kind of perfection that doesn't feel lived in, it feels performed. I moved slowly through the living room. Every shelf, every picture frame screamed control. There were photos everywhere of Michael, him at a graduation, him at a conference, him shaking hands with someone important. His smile was wide in every one, but his eyes never smiled. There was only one photo of Sarah, their wedding photo. It hung just above the fireplace. At first glance, it was beautiful. A happy couple, smiling at the camera, but then I noticed the small details. Michael stood in the center, his hand on Sarah's shoulder, slightly in front of her, like he owned the spotlight. And Sarah? She was just a little behind him, her smile small, almost apologetic, even in the frame. She was diminished. I climbed the stairs. Every step creaked softly, the sound echoing through the hollow quiet. Upstairs, the bedroom was large, sterile, and spotless like a hotel room that no one had ever slept in. The bed was made with military precision. The curtains hung perfectly still. There wasn't a single book, not a single item that said, "Someone lives here." Then, I opened the closet. And that was when everything made sense. 3/4 of the space belonged to Michael rows of tailored suits, crisp shirts arranged by color, and leather shoes lined up like soldiers on parade. Everything screamed power, control, dominance. And then there was Sarah's corner, a small section tucked at the far end, a handful of dresses, a few pairs of shoes, basic, worn, ordinary. It didn't look like a woman's space, it looked like a guest's, like she was merely passing through her own home. I checked the time. 2 hours before Michael returned. My pulse quickened. Every second mattered. That was when I began searching. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. Sarah had warned me. He watches everything. The first camera I found was hidden in the living room bookshelf, disguised as a decorative book spine. The second was behind a framed photograph in the hallway. The third sat quietly in the kitchen vent. Each discovery made my stomach twist tighter. Michael was everywhere. Even when he wasn't there, he was watching. But Sarah had prepared me. She'd told me about the one place he never bothered to monitor, the guest bathroom downstairs. It was her space, her small, sacred corner of freedom. Michael never stepped inside, said it was her responsibility to keep it clean, as if even cleanliness was another chain in his control. That was where I hid my tool, a tiny pen camera, its lens no larger than a pinhead. I placed it inside the medicine cabinet, angled just right to capture the hallway. It was subtle, invisible. If anything was going to bring Michael's secrets into the light, it would be that tiny, silent witness. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the quiet emptiness pressing in from all sides. My reflection in the bathroom mirror didn't even look like me. I looked like her, Sarah, subdued, cautious, small. That was the role I had to play now. To step into her life, her mannerisms, her fear, because only by becoming her could I understand what she endured. The hours crawled by. Each tick of the clock stretched longer than the last. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the neat place settings, the folded napkins, the spotless countertops. This was the stage, and I was about to meet the villain. At 5:45, I heard the low mechanical groan of the garage door opening. The sound made my stomach drop. My hands went cold. He was home. I inhaled deeply. 1 breath, 2. I forced my face into calm submission, the kind of calm Sarah had perfected to survive. My performance was about to begin. He entered the house at exactly 5:47, not a minute early, not a minute late. Punctuality as control, that was Michael in a nutshell. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Slow, confident, each one deliberate, echoing through the silence. Then his voice low, steady, unnervingly calm. Sarah. The sound of her name, my name, now froze me for a heartbeat. I swallowed hard, forced the tremor out of my voice. In the kitchen, I answered, keeping it soft, careful, almost apologetic. When he appeared in the doorway, I almost forgot to breathe. On the surface, he looked normal, clean-shaven, handsome. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, the picture of an ordinary man coming home from work. But there was something in his eyes, something sharp, unblinking, hungry for control. "You're home," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "Yes," I murmured. "I've been here all day." "Doing what?" I didn't look up. "Cleaning, preparing dinner." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the kitchen floor. I could smell his cologne, expensive, clinical, almost sterile. "What are we having?" "Chicken marsala. Your favorite." He checked his watch. "It's 6:15. Dinner better be ready in 15 minutes. "It will be." He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. The silence was unbearable. My heart thudded in my chest so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I kept my hands steady, kept stirring the sauce, pretending not to feel his gaze burning into my back. Then, finally, he spoke. "Good, I'm going to change. Don't disappoint me." As he walked away, I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the counter just to stay upright. When the sound of his footsteps faded upstairs, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands trembled as I plated the food, every muscle in my body aching from the effort of pretending. The first test was over, and I had passed. But the night was far from done. Because surviving Michael wasn't about just playing the part, it was about staying one step ahead in a house where every shadow had eyes. And somewhere upstairs, the devil was changing his clothes. He came down at exactly 6:30. Of course he did. Michael never missed a time, never broke a pattern. His life was a clock, and everyone around him was expected to tick in rhythm with him. I heard the steady cadence of his footsteps, descending the stairs, measured, deliberate. The steps of a man who believed the world would always wait for him. I had set the table exactly as Sarah described. Silverware aligned with military precision. Napkin folded once, edges square. Wine glass placed exactly 1 inch from the knife. Chicken marsala centered perfectly on his plate, steam rising like nervous breath. It wasn't dinner, it was a ritual. And I was the offering. He entered the dining room without a word. He didn't glance around, didn't compliment the meal. He just sat, adjusted his chair by 1/2 inch, picked up his fork, began to eat. I followed his lead, careful not to clink my utensils too loudly. The silence was suffocating, thick enough to choke on. For the first 5 minutes, nothing existed but the sound of cutlery scraping porcelain. Every scrape felt like a blade slicing through my nerves. I barely touched my food, my stomach was too tight, my mind too aware of every movement, every glance. Then, without warning, he spoke. "You seem different today." Just 4 words. But they hit like a thunderclap. My blood ran cold. My fingers froze around the fork. I lifted my gaze slowly, careful to keep my expression soft, neutral. "Different how?" I asked, forcing steadiness into my voice. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set his fork down, the sound precise, deliberate. Then he leaned back, studying me the way a scientist studies an experiment that might explode. "I'm not sure yet," he said quietly. "Did something happen?" My pulse spiked. This was a test. I could feel it. A trap, laid out neatly between the salad fork and the dinner knife. I forced a small smile. "No, nothing. Just trying to do better. Like you said." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Like I said when?" There it was. The snare tightening. I felt every instinct scream to be careful. This man didn't argue to understand. He argued to dominate. "The other day," I said softly, "you said I needed to try harder, to be better. I'm trying." Silence stretched between us, taut as wire. He stared, unblinking. Then, slowly, he picked up his fork again. "The chicken is dry." The words landed like a slap. My throat tightened. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I can—" He cut me off with a single flick of his hand. "Don't apologize. Fix it next time." "Yes, of course." He took another bite, chewed slowly, watching me the whole time as though waiting for me to break. The tension in the air was unbearable, electric, and poisonous. Then, without warning, his hand reached across the table and closed around my wrist. Not hard. Not yet. Just firm enough to remind me who was in control. The touch sent a cold wave up my arm. My instinct screamed to pull back, but I didn't move. I had to stay in character. I had to survive this moment. "You know," he said softly, voice dripping with false warmth, "I only want what's best for you." I nodded faintly. "I know. Everything I do," he continued, "is because I love you." I met his gaze for the briefest second, and it felt like staring into a void. "I know." He tilted his head, his grip tightening slightly. "Do you?" His tone sharpened like a knife. "Because sometimes I think you forget. Sometimes I think you take me for granted." It took everything inside me not to react. Every muscle in my arm was coiled, ready to twist, to break, to defend. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed him to trust the illusion that I was meek, compliant, harmless. "I don't take you for granted," I whispered. "I promise." He stared at me for a long, excruciating moment, then finally released my wrist. His fingers slid away slowly, leaving behind a faint ache that felt like a bruise waiting to bloom. "Good," he said with a smile that never touched his eyes. "Now clean up. I have work to do." I nodded. "Yes." He rose from his chair and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the hallway until they vanished upstairs. Only then did I exhale. The tension in my shoulders released in a rush so sharp it almost made me dizzy. I looked down at my plate. The chicken marsala had gone cold. The wine glass trembled slightly in my hand. My wrist still tingled where he had touched me. That was just day one. One dinner, one conversation, one glimpse into the mind of a man who used love as a weapon. And I still had 6 more days to survive. 6 more days to live in a house built on fear and control. 6 more days to make him believe I belonged there. But Michael was already suspicious, and I could feel it, that slow tightening of the net. The walls watching, the air listening. Every move I made, every word I spoke from this point forward would have to be perfect. One wrong breath, and he'd know. He'd know I wasn't Sarah. He'd know I was the storm coming for him. The next 3 days felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Every word, every gesture, every silence was a test. Day 2, Michael woke up angry. No reason, no warning, just simmering rage. It began with the shirts. He said I folded them wrong. The sleeves weren't crisp enough, the collars too soft. Then it was the temperature of the house. Too warm, too cold, too something. Even the way I breathed annoyed him. He looked up from his laptop once and said, "Do you have to breathe so loudly?" I froze. My lungs obeyed him out of fear. He was testing boundaries, pushing to see when I'd snap. But I didn't. I stayed calm, apologized when he demanded it, nodded when he was right, even when he wasn't. Meanwhile, the camera I'd hidden watched everything, silent, patient, recording him berating me for 10 straight minutes because I'd bought the wrong brand of yogurt. His words, his tone all preserved. Every drop of venom, now evidence. Day 3. He went through my phone. Sat on the couch with a glass of wine like it was casual. "Who's Linda?" he asked. "An old friend," I said. "She just checked in." He smiled, the kind of smile that never meant anything good. He deleted her contact, handed the phone back like a parent returning a confiscated toy. "You don't need friends," he said. "You have me." Then he grabbed my arm, twisted it slowly behind my back until my body bent forward from the pain. His breath brushed my ear when he whispered, "Do you understand me?" "Yes," I said. Tears filled my eyes, but not from the pain. They came from the fury I had to swallow, the rage that burned so deep I thought it might eat me alive. The camera caught that too, his voice, his grip, the violence behind his so-called love. Day 4, he came home with flowers, roses, perfect, red, expensive. He held them out like a peace offering, as though the bruises on my wrist didn't exist. "See how good I am to you?" he said. "See how much I love you?" That's the cruelty of people like him. They confuse kindness with control. Hurt you, then feed you sweetness so you'll thank them for the poison. He watched as I placed the flowers in a vase. I smiled when he wanted me to. Said thank you like I meant it. Played my part flawlessly. But when he left for work the next morning, I became someone else entirely. I picked the lock to his study, a skill I hadn't used in years, but desperation sharpens memory. Inside, I found his world, folders neatly stacked, each one labeled. One of them had Sarah's name. Inside, photos, notes, GPS data. He'd been tracking her for years. Every trip to the grocery store, every lunch with a friend, every phone call, documented, time-stamped, analyzed. Then I found emails, messages to his lawyer about handling an unstable spouse. He was preparing to have Sarah committed if she ever tried to leave him, building a narrative that she was dangerous, delusional. I felt sick. The depth of his manipulation was staggering. He wasn't just controlling her life, he was rewriting her reality. I photographed everything, every file, every email, every document. My hands trembled, but my resolve didn't. And then I found the final layer: his financial records. Offshore accounts, money siphoned from joint investments Sarah didn't even know existed. He'd been planning an escape, a life without her, while still keeping her trapped. But as damning as it all was, it still wasn't enough. I needed his words, his confession, his voice admitting what he'd done. The camera had captured his cruelty, yes, but not his intent. And without that, he'd find a way to twist it all. I needed him to say it himself, on camera, and that moment would come. It came on day 5, when everything went wrong. The morning of day 5 felt wrong from the moment I opened my eyes. The house was heavy, thick with silence and tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Michael was already awake, pacing, muttering, irritated by everything and nothing. I could tell immediately it was one of those days, the kind of day Sarah used to dread. The kind of day when she would walk on eggshells, apologizing for breathing too loud. His coffee was too hot, then too cold. Breakfast was either bland or burned, depending on which way the wind of his mood blew. Every word I said only seemed to sharpen his anger. I stayed small, quiet, soft, Sarah's usual survival pattern. That was the only way to get through mornings like this without blood or tears. When he finally grabbed his keys and stormed out, the sound of the door slamming shook the walls. My heart jumped, even though I'd been expecting it. I exhaled, slow and steady. That door slam wasn't the end, it was a promise. When he came home, he'd be worse. I'd seen the pattern, studied it. The calm before the storm always came around 5. I walked through the living room, adjusting the angle of the hidden camera one last time. The lens blinked red, a small, silent witness waiting for the truth. I checked the light, the line of sight, the reflection from the window. Everything was perfect. This time, there would be no denial, no gaslighting, no rewriting of what happened. But to get the truth, I needed to provoke him. I needed to push the button that shattered his mask. So, I picked up Sarah's phone. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I typed the message carefully. "We need to talk when you get home." It was only 6 words, but they would change everything. Sarah would never have sent that message. She would have waited, apologized for existing, and hoped his mood passed. But that's exactly why I had to do it. I needed him angry, furious enough to show the monster he really was. I set the phone down, my reflection staring back at me from the black screen. My face, Sarah's face, mirrored in the same features. But behind my eyes was something she never had anymore: control. As I waited, thunder rolled in the distance. The first drops of rain tapped against the window, slow at first, then steady, like the ticking of a clock counting down to an explosion. The minutes crawled. My pulse drummed in my throat. Every creak of the house felt louder. I wasn't afraid, not of what he'd do, but of what I might have to become to end this. Then, at exactly 5, the door flew open. The sound was violent, final, like the sky itself had cracked. His footsteps hit the floor hard and fast. He was home early. My heart raced. The storm had arrived sooner than I expected. He entered the room with fury in every movement. The air changed. The temperature dropped. I could feel his rage before he even spoke. I'd seen that look before in photos, in reports, in Sarah's bruises. He said something, words laced with venom, but I barely heard them. My focus tunneled to the camera. I kept my breathing even, my posture small, submissive, feeding his anger, letting him build his own rope. His voice grew louder. The energy in the room turned violent. He moved closer, too close. The air smelled like sweat and rage. His eyes were cold, his jaw tight, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the need to control, to dominate. Then he reached for me. His fingers clamped around my arm, hard enough to bruise. I stumbled back, just enough to make it look real, to make him believe I was weak. My shoulder hit the wall. I gasped. Not because it hurt, but because the camera needed to hear it. I kept my eyes on his face, memorizing every detail, every flash of rage. This was who he truly was. Not the charming man Sarah once loved, not the polished professional everyone admired. This was the predator behind the mask. He shouted more, voice breaking, words spilling out like acid. I let them burn, let them fill the air. Every insult, every accusation, every drop of venom was another nail in his own coffin. Then his hand moved to my throat. The pressure was immediate, cruel, familiar. I'd read about it in Sarah's journal, how he used his hands like a weapon, how she'd sometimes lose consciousness, wake up hours later, pretending she'd fainted. Feeling that same grip on my neck now made every story real. His thumb pressed against my windpipe, my vision blurred at the edges. He leaned in close, his breath hot and bitter. His words cut through the air like a blade, something about ending it, about finishing what he started. That was it, the moment. The confession, the threat, the proof. I let the seconds stretch. 1, 2, 3. Long enough for the camera to capture every detail. The rage in his face, the violence in his hands, the intent behind his words. My body screamed for oxygen, but my mind stayed sharp. This was the evidence I needed, the truth Sarah never got to show anyone. Then I moved. A precise motion, swift and controlled. I grabbed his wrist, twisted, and pressed a point near the base of his thumb. His body reacted instantly, pain, surprise, confusion flashing across his face. His grip released. I stepped to the side, used his own momentum against him, and drove him forward until he hit the wall. The sound echoed. He froze. I could see the disbelief in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't in control. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. But I wasn't her. The mask of fear fell away. My spine straightened. My voice, when it came, was steady, cold, calm. I told him the truth, not in words yet, but in the way I stood, the way I looked him in the eye. He blinked, confused. He saw me, but didn't recognize me. The resemblance was too close, but the energy was different, stronger, anchored. He finally noticed the difference, the edge of confidence that Sarah never carried. His confusion turned to horror. That's when I told him who I was. The look in his eyes was priceless, shock, fear, disbelief colliding all at once. Everything he thought he knew shattered in that single second. I could see him realizing what had just happened. The text, the setup, the camera, the confession, all of it. He looked toward the lens, saw the faint red light blinking. And then, for the first time, he understood. The hunter had become the prey. Panic flickered in his eyes. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I stepped closer. I told him, in calm, measured words, everything he had done, every bruise, every broken bone, every threat. How it was all documented, how it was all over. He lunged, desperate, wild. But I was ready. I stepped aside, let him crash to the floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground was almost satisfying, a punctuation mark to 5 years of torment. I stood over him, breathing steady now. Outside, sirens began to wail, distant at first, then closer, right on time. I had called them 20 minutes earlier, just as I planned. His face drained of color. Fear replaced the rage. And as the flashing lights painted the walls in red and blue, I knew this was it. The end of his reign. The moment the truth finally spoke louder than his lies. The storm had broken. And for the first time in years, Sarah could finally breathe. The sirens grew louder until they were everywhere outside, in the walls, vibrating through the floorboards. Blue and red light painted the living room in sharp flashes, like the world itself was breathing with me. When the police finally entered, everything moved in slow motion. Michael was still on the ground, stunned, silent, trembling in disbelief. For a man who'd spent years controlling every moment of Sarah's life, that silence was justice in its purest form. The officers moved with calm precision. One read him his rights, while another slipped the cold steel around his wrists. The sound of the handcuffs closing was small, almost delicate, but it carried more power than any scream. That sound meant the nightmare was over. Michael Morrison was arrested that night. The charges came one after another, a list that felt both surreal and necessary. Domestic violence, assault, battery, unlawful imprisonment, stalking, attempted murder. Words that once lived only in Sarah's medical reports and nightmares now echoed in a courtroom. For years, he had twisted the truth until it suited him. Told anyone who would listen that Sarah was unstable, forgetful, dramatic. Now, the truth had finally found its voice, and it was his own. His lawyer tried everything, said it was entrapment, claimed I'd provoked him, argued that the camera violated his privacy. But the evidence was overwhelming. 5 years of medical records, photos, x-rays, reports documenting every injury she'd ever tried to hide. Testimonies from neighbors who'd heard the screaming but never knew what to do. Surveillance files from the very system he'd installed to monitor her. Financial documents showing his manipulation, his obsession with control. And, of course, the recordings. His voice, his threats, his hands on my throat, his own words sealing his fate. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat beside Sarah every day, watching her hands tremble, then steady, then finally rest still. She was facing the man who once made her fear her own reflection, and she didn't flinch. When the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. 4 hours later, they returned. The verdict was read aloud. Guilty on all counts. Michael Morrison was sentenced to 15 years in prison. No parole for at least 10. His law license was revoked. His assets were divided. Sarah got half of everything, including the accounts he'd tried to hide. He lost his career, his freedom, his power. Everything he'd built on fear and control crumbled in a single moment of truth. And I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. After the trial, Sarah began therapy the very next week. It wasn't a storybook recovery. Healing never is. She'd lived 5 years in a world where love meant pain, where silence meant safety. Unlearning that took time. The first few months were hard nightmares, panic attacks, moments where she couldn't even leave the house without her chest tightening. But for the first time, she wasn't alone. She had a team now, a therapist who understood trauma, a support group of women who had survived similar darkness, and me, always me. There were setbacks, days she'd call crying, convinced she'd never be whole again. Nights she'd wake up screaming. But there were victories too small, quiet ones that only we noticed. The first time she laughed without guilt. The first time she slept through the night. The first morning she opened her windows and let the sunlight in. It took months, then years, but she began to find herself again. She moved into a new apartment, bright, open, full of plants and music. No locked doors, no cameras, no fear. She started volunteering again at the nonprofit she loved, helping women rebuild their lives after trauma. She made new friends, reconnected with old ones, started dancing again, cooking again, living again. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. She became the sister I remembered, strong, kind, full of light. 2 years after the arrest, Sarah stood in front of a small group of women in a community center. She was nervous at first, but then her voice grew steady. She shared her story not as a victim, but as a survivor. That day, Sarah the abused wife became Sarah the advocate. Now, she runs a support group for domestic violence survivors. Every week, she listens, comforts, and encourages. She tells them, in her calm, warm voice, "It's never too late. You're never too broken. You deserve better." Her words carry weight because she's lived them. She's been seeing someone new for 6 months now, a teacher. Quiet, gentle, patient. When I met him, I waited for that instinctive tension, that old knot of dread I used to feel around Michael. But it never came. Instead, I saw how he looked at her with respect, with care, with genuine love, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to protect her. She was safe. That brings me to why I'm telling this story. Because someone, somewhere, needs to hear it. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you love. Maybe you've been convincing yourself that what's happening isn't really abuse, that if you just stay quiet, it'll stop. But please, listen to me. It's not your fault. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not too sensitive. You're being abused. And you deserve better. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. You deserve love that doesn't hurt. Please, don't wait for things to get worse. Don't believe the lie that you can't escape. You can. And you don't have to do it alone. I did something extreme to save my sister. Not everyone can switch places with their twin. But everyone can do something. If someone you love is being hurt, don't look away. Don't be silent. Be loud. Be stubborn. Be present. Because silence protects abusers. Speaking up saves lives. My father used to say, "Family protects family." That's what I did. And if I had to do it all over again, I would without hesitation, without fear, without regret. Because love, when it's real, doesn't hide from darkness. It shines right through it. Thank you, truly, from the bottom of my heart, for staying with me through this story, for listening, for caring, for giving Sarah and me your time and your heart. If this story touched you, even a little, please share it. You never know who might need to hear it tonight. Someone out there might be sitting in silence, wondering if what they're living through is normal. Someone might be convincing themselves to stay one more day. And maybe, just maybe, hearing Sarah's journey, hearing our fight, might give them the courage to take that first step toward freedom. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have switched places with someone you love, even if it meant risking everything? Have you ever had to protect someone you love from something or someone that tried to break them? I'd love to hear your story, because stories like these remind us we're not alone. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, if you believe in courage, in truth, in family, and in justice, then please, subscribe. This channel is built for people like you, people who believe that love is powerful, that truth still matters, and that silence should never win. We tell real stories here. Stories of strength, of heartbreak, of survival, of the quiet heroes who refuse to back down. When you subscribe, you become part of that community, a place where pain turns into purpose, and where voices once silenced are finally heard. So go ahead and hit that notification bell too. That way, you'll never miss the next story, the next truth, the next reminder that there is light even in the darkest places. And if you're someone who's still finding their voice, still healing, still trying to believe that things can get better, I want you to remember this. You are stronger than you think, even on your weakest days. Even when your hands shake and your heart aches, there's still strength in you. Quiet, patient, unyielding strength. You are braver than you know. Bravery isn't about never being scared, it's about standing up, even when you are. It's choosing to speak when silence feels safer. It's saying, I deserve more, and believing it, one small step at a time. And most of all, you are never alone. Not in your pain, not in your fear, not in your healing. There's a whole world of people who've been where you are. People who got out, who rebuilt, who found peace. People who will listen, who will help, who will walk beside you until you can stand on your own again. So please, don't carry it all by yourself. Reach out. Tell someone. Start with one small word, help. That single word can change everything. And when you do, know that somewhere, Sarah and I are rooting for you. Because we've been there. And we know what it feels like to come back from the dark. So thank you for listening, for sharing, for being part of this story. And for believing, even for a moment, that love and courage can still win. This is Rachel, and this has been our story. But maybe, in some small way, it's yours too. Remember, you are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and you are never, ever alone.